Every description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
Yep, those of you who are regulars, you'll know that, of course, there's Neil deGrasse Tyson and a controversial intro. For some, g'day, it is episode 13 of this live podcast of an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. Something we have yet to try, looking forward to. Heaven knows what the punchline might be if we ever do it. Let's hope it's funnier than our podcast. But in all fairness, humour is not exactly the focus here. But we do like to have a laugh, such as the likelihood of 4 Aussie blokes from Australia. G'day, I'm your host, Peter Rowe. Great to be back for another thought-provoking episode. Tonight is no exception. We're talking about hell. My co-hosts are a long-time believer of God and a man who looks very deeply into the philosophical meaning of God and belief, Richard Stralls, Bible teacher and part-time pastor Luke Feeney, and a man who describes himself as a Christian who doesn't believe in the supernatural. That will give you some idea what you're in for tonight. Jason Jordan, welcome and thanks for stepping in for Suresh at late notice. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Jace.
Oh, where do we even start? I have 4 adult children, a beautiful wife. I have worked in either media or the IT industry for my whole life. And I also particularly like to be a board member of not-for-profit organizations. So they vary from media organizations like West TV, community radio stations, and even Multiple Sclerosis WA. But more recently, my very favorite endeavor has been as a patient advocate to try and destigmatize the use of medical cannabis, which I've found to be a very, very effective medicine with very few side effects.
Just quickly before we go into tonight's subject, Jace, how is it going with the availability of people who get great comfort out of being able to have medical cannabis?
Yeah, it's been a long haul, and you probably realize that cannabis as a medicine was legalized probably 5 or 6 years ago now. As I do have multiple sclerosis, I was one of the first patients to be prescribed medical cannabis. And I have to tell you, Pete, it's the single most effective medication I've ever tried in my life. As a direct result of trying it, I was able to drop 7 of my daily medications. And every day I take cannabis, and not just an extract of cannabis, but the real McCoy, the full thing. And it has been incredible. When I've tried weaning myself off it, the symptoms have returned. And so for me, cannabis has been, I'm going to phrase it this way, an absolute godsend. It's been amazing.
Out of 10, what would you rate it as the improvement in your life?
Oh, well, so I don't know if you know what they call the EDSS, which is the disability scale. So I had reached 6.5 on that scale, which means you're just shy of going into a wheelchair. I was drooling. I was incontinent. I had facial paralysis, could not speak properly. And for somebody who has also worked in the media most of my life, for you to lose the ability to speak clearly, coherently, is devastating. And so when I went on to the medical cannabis and found that within 3 to 4 weeks, I was able to throw away my walking stick and that my ability to talk came back, I've got about 90% of my original function back. And I put it all down to the medical cannabis, and it is absolutely amazing. And I don't want to dominate the beginning of the show too much with these stories, but there was a woman that came and saw me at one of the lectures that I do. She had a child that had cerebral palsy as well as displaced hips, and said to me, is this something that we can give to children? And I said, well, you've got to speak to your doctor, first of all. But she ended up doing that, came and saw me a year later. That child had doubled their body weight to the weight that they were supposed to be. And she put it down to the medical cannabis as well. So I'm not saying that this is a miracle plant, but for me and for some other people, it's had miracle type results.
Oh, I think it's a great opportunity to utilize this podcast to actually try and get that message out there, because for people who don't understand, like me, what that must be like, it must drive you crazy knowing that there is something out there that can improve lives so much and yet because of bureaucracy and a whole bunch of other, stupid reasons, people can't naturally, get their hands on it to improve their lives.
Incredibly frustrating, Pete. And as a member of the Multiple Sclerosis WA board, one of the biggest challenges I had is that we had 2 neurologists on the board, both of whom point blank refused to accept the evidence behind medical cannabis, even though there's so many papers now being published. And I was on the board. They watched me go from being so incapacitated into being so functional, and they still would not allow anybody at the MS Society to talk about it. I even said, all I want to do is put a little story in the monthly magazine that says, talk to your doctor, find out whether it will be effective for you. That's all I wanted to do, but they wouldn't let me do it. So yes, very frustrating.
Yeah. It's let's hope there's some improvement. There's certainly got a great advocate in you on the side of the people who need it. So thanks for that, mate. Appreciate it. So there's our 3 co-hosts. I am like Jason, and I think he is an atheist, having been a Christian for over 25 years, which I stopped about 12 years ago. In a nutshell, I wanted proof. I don't necessarily think it's God's responsibility for him to prove to me he's real, but that would be very audacious of me, I think. In order to believe, I want evidence, something tangible. So far, there's slim pickings, but I live in hope. This is a live broadcast if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook on Wednesday, the 20th of March, just after 8 o'clock, 2024, Australian Western Standard Time. Now, the reason why I told people that, of course, is that we are broadcasting right around the world with many different time zones and different days. So it kind of might be a little bit helpful. That also means that you can ask us a question because we are live or make a comment for the next hour and a half. So please join in. Heavy subject tonight for some. We're talking about hell, a place regarded in various religions as a spiritual realm of evil and suffering, often traditionally depicted as a place of perpetual fire beneath the earth where the wicked are punished after death. Even kids, that's right, irreligious children were assumed to have passed straight to the eternal fires of hell. Wow, hell has its origins in many pre-Christian beliefs. These include Greek mythology, Hades, of course, in divided, my words are all mixed up, is divided, in regions for the good, the neutral, and the bad. The term hell is derived from the Germanic realm of the afterlife, Hel, 1L. The Christian belief in hell has developed over the centuries, including both Jewish and Greek ideas of the afterlife. The earliest parts of the Hebrew Bible around the 8th century BC described the afterlife as Sheol, a shadowy, silent pit where the souls of the dead lingered in a minimal state of silent existence. Sounds like some of the pubs I used to go to. Forever outside of the presence of God. By the 6th century BC, Sheol was increasingly viewed as a temporary place where all of the departed awaited a bodily resurrection. The righteous would then dwell in the presence of God, and the wicked would suffer in a fiery torment that became to be called Gehenna. I think it's pronounced Gehenna, described as a cursed place of fire and smoke. Now, thankfully, there is no evidence that such a place exists. However, the thought of such a place still messes with the minds of many of us, often inflicting lifelong psychological damage with debilitating impact. Why? Well, even though there's no evidence for the existence of hell, the same applies to heaven. And I say no evidence of heaven, I don't mean show me some evidence in this instance. We've done that before. We should continue on that path. But what I mean is if you're going to believe in a heaven with no evidence, then logically the same would apply to hell, which is why it is such a powerful negative force, often devastating reality for so many people. I know in my early time as a Christian, I remember thinking that there was definitely a heaven, and don't the two just go together? I thought they did. Hell has had a remarkable impact in our lives, influencing song titles and lyrics. There's famous paintings about hell. There's The Tempest. Shakespeare's character Prospero utters the line, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here." Sayings like, "See you in hell," "When hell freezes over." The list is long and varied. "Go to hell" is a ripper, or "Hell no." But the fear that many live in is that hell actually exists. Lots of people do. What do you think? Does it in your mind? Let us know. What do my co-hosts think? Let's kick it off with the discussion. Let's start off with Luke. What do you think, Luke? What does hell mean to you?
Yeah, I like how we start with the light and easy stuff on this podcast. That's great.
Look, gently. That's the idea.
the Bible teacher. Does the Bible teacher believe in hell? I did. I definitely did. That's what I was taught. Do I now? No, definitely not in the sense that we are talking about. I do not believe certainly do not believe in a hell of eternal conscious torment. This sort of this fire and brimstone sort of afterlife place where if you, I guess, have the wrong theology, not even if you're a bad person, just if you don't say the right prayer, or you're not really born in the right location, or your parents aren't of the right faith, and you end up in this place. I think it's an absolute. In my mind, it's a heresy now. I think it's utterly incompatible with the God of love. There's such dissonance in the idea that a God of actual love would allow eternal torment. It's inconsistent with the character of God. It's inconsistent with the narrative that we believe as Christians, that Christ will be victorious and that death was conquered. The reason I believed it so was because I thought that Scripture, it was just clear cut, that it was clear and unambiguous that this is what the Bible says is going to happen, but it doesn't. And there is, I have great understanding and there is no malice or anger for people that I think preach this, or that people that believe it, because I totally get how you would arrive to this interpretation. And as it stands, it is the prevailing viewpoint of the church. So I do understand that. But when you actually look at it, what's in Scripture is incredibly ambiguous. It's contradictory. There's a lot there which I'll go into. I don't want to use up the introduction on too much of that. I'm sure we'll get into it, but safe to say, in digging into it, no, I don't believe in that type of hell.
But without going too far into it, as you say, what would be the most prevalent mention of what you're talking about? What was it you read that convinced you that there was such a thing as hell?
Look, there's when Jesus talks of these parables, there's one in particular, Matthew 25, where it talks about, it's at the end of the sheep and the goats, and basically says that those who did this to the least of these did these to me, and then he goes on to say, and those that didn't effectively will be cast into eternal punishment. Plus all of the translations in the Bible, it was hell, which once you dig into it, you realize that really that's not a good translation. We're talking about 4 different types of words, all meaning very different ideas and concepts, but they're all translated the word hell. Even in that Matthew 25, that eternal punishment, it's not an accurate translation. It really should be the chastisement of the age. That Greek word for punishment actually originally meant more like pruning of like a tree, that you correct like a tree's growth by cutting it off and pruning. And then that idea of correction kind of developed into this idea of punishment. But even that word eternal, it's not eternal. It's the age to come. It doesn't mean forever and ever and ever. It's just talking about the length of an age. So without getting too lost in the weeds, it's an ambiguous thing. Even in the stuff that you read a translation and goes, oh, this is clear cut, Jesus is talking about hell. But also we bring that into our reading of it, because that's all we know. So when we start reading this, we go, oh, clearly he's talking about hell. But is he? There's a lot to it. And then you look at the fact that Paul doesn't mention it at all. It's not mentioned in the Old Testament at all. Even in the other epistolatory letters, it's barely mentioned. It's mentioned a little bit in Revelation, but you've got to take any of Revelation with a big grain of salt. It's a difficult book to read. And then you got Jesus talking about it in these different areas, and he's using different stuff. There's metaphors, but we kind of go, they're not metaphors, but that is. And we pick and choose. Even when the thing you're talking about, Gehenna, it's an actual place. He was talking about the Valley of Hinnom. It was literally a place. So the people he's talking to is referring to something that's happening now. Your life can be in this place now, not one day when you die. So I understand people coming to that position. and there's a whole history behind that there, but is utterly incompatible with God. Then the real question becomes, what is Christianity all about if it's not fire insurance? What's the point? What does it mean to share the gospel if you're not just trying to save someone from eternal fire and brimstone? Which would be a great question. And there's a whole lot of logical inconsistencies with the belief in hell.
All right. Well, we've had atheists and we've had Christians, so it's an atheist turn again. So let's switch over to Jace. What do you think? What does hell mean to you? Is it real in any way, shape, or form to you?
No. And, I guess that's what I was saying before about being a Christian who doesn't believe in the supernatural. When I say that, it's Christian values without the supernatural. And look, this whole idea of Pascal's wager, which is, the idea that you should believe or otherwise, if you're wrong, you risk going to hell. That just it doesn't stand with me at all. It's, when Luke mentioned that hell's not mentioned in the Old Testament, it's the Old Testament God is the God that you would imagine would talk about things like hell. You wouldn't imagine the New Testament God would talk about things like that. And yet we see people who are very, very scared because they're worried that they could end up going to hell. But then I get into this whole conversation with Christians around this idea that even though I, through my deeds, prove myself to be a decent person, a compassionate person, a charitable person who has all of the values that we would want in our fellow human beings, apparently I'm still destined for hell simply because I don't believe in a supernatural deity. And to my mind, that is an incredibly hypocritical is the wrong word. It's an argument that doesn't sit well with thinking people. Now, when we start talking about Christians who have faith that there is a heaven and a hell, I had this conversation last weekend with a very staunch Christian who said, if you believe in heaven and you believe in hell, then you're going to be a better behaved person. And I said straight away at that point, well, hang on a second. I'm a good person because I choose to be a good person and I set my own morality. If you're only a good person because you're scared of going to hell, you're actually not a good person. You're a bad person on a leash because you're just scared of going to hell. And then we got into this conversation about, if you don't, base your morality on the Bible, what's to stop you going out there and murdering and raping just as much as you want? And I said, well, hang on. I do go out there and rape and murder just as much as I want, which is absolutely zero because I don't want to, because my morality is based on what I call the one commandment. And you know where I'm going with this. And I know Pete's talked about this previously as well. Now, I phrase it slightly differently to how most people would phrase it. And I apologize for the fact that I'm going to use a word which could be considered inappropriate by some, but it works because it helps people understand what you're talking about. The one commandment, don't be a dick. All right?
Sure.
Don't be an idiot. Don't be
I was worried then.
I hear you.
We've said that many times.
This section, I honestly believe that if you live by that one commandment and expect everybody else to live by that one commandment as well, you can actually track that back to almost every single one of the 10 commandments. Don't covet thy neighbor's wife. Don't be a dick. Don't steal things. Don't be a dick. It's that simple. We don't need to worry about heaven and hell as long as we're just pleasant to each other.
Yeah.
I yield.
Beautiful. No, well put, mate. God, I was don't know about you guys, but I was seriously nervous because I've used that word and I thought you were going to introduce another word, and I think we all know what you're talking about. Either way, the premise either way, the meaning is the same. You if you want to add more to that, then I really don't know what you could add more that would make you a better person than just not being not being dick. I don't think it's necessary to add anything. Okay, and
we've lost him.
We've got on mute again, Pete. Let me go.
I don't know why it's doing that. That's crazy. What I was saying was that these guys are far more liberal and you don't have to worry about
might have been the Lord, Pete.
You think?
So God works in mysterious ways, Pete.
Well, both of you are going to hell, so you know, be careful. Just be careful. Okay, Rich, let's get your slant on it, please.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. Just piggybacking off what Jay said about morality, I pulled out a bit of research because I'm actually doing a PhD in education. So through my university, I can get all these studies. So it's great. So pulling together a whole bunch of sociological studies around a belief in hell. And they did look at certain societies, particularly developing countries, a belief in hell, or I'm broadening it to be like an afterlife punishment, like justice. You can't get away with stuff because somebody's watching you, and you're going to get it even if you don't get it here. Developing countries, if you control for a whole bunch of variables, they tend to have a higher GDP. Interesting sort of take. But in certain societies, a belief in hell does correspond to a slightly lower crime rate and that sort of social order and control and actually a move towards rule following, which seems natural. You know, there's a couple of ways you can parent. You can scare the hell out of your kids and they'll do what they're told until they get bigger than you, and then you'll do what you're told. So because it works. But is that the best way? Is it a good long-term solution? Is it something that we want to be? Do we want to only be good because we're bad people on a leash, or do we want to create internal structures, like you said, that are unconstrainedly good? And I've heard that so many times in my church experience, and it's the most ludicrous, immoral argument for morality I've ever heard. It's ridiculous. And any Christians out there, please just stop it. You're not doing anybody any favors. You're making yourself look silly, and you're actually bringing disrepute in the whole thing. Anyway, however, I guess thinking about hell, again, like Luke, that's what I grew up believing because that's what I was given. But anybody who's listening to us as we go along, I'm furiously, thoroughly examining. I always examine myself. I've loved science, loved the scientific method, and bringing that to bear on your beliefs is quite important. But when I look at friends and family and colleagues who are Christians who say they believe in hell, I'm very unconvinced that they actually believe in hell. And what I'm talking about is a hell of eternal conscious torment. There's no escape. The sort of evangelical story is you don't say the prayer, you die. There's nothing but to go to this place where you'll be tormented forever and ever without any escape. Okay, that's that story of hell. If that's the truth, so you dig a little bit deeper and you ask them, so do kids go to hell? And then they'll humph and ha, and because we're not Catholics and we're not old school Catholics who say, well, if you die unbaptized, you're going to be in hell. So we come up with stories like, oh, we've got this ridiculous notion called what's it, Luke? The age of accountability. That's right.
Age of accountability. Yeah.
Yes. So somehow there's this magic thing around, depending on how smart you are, I guess, between 8 and 13. Suddenly you go from doing whatever you want, and then suddenly you'll end up in hell if you don't say the prayer.
I think it was like 12. It's like,
yeah,
happy birthday. Happy birthday, son.
Yeah. So we're not just talking about a life off the rails. We're not talking about struggling with drugs or whatever. We're talking about you don't make it forever and ever and ever. And it's not just like unpleasant or it's dark, it's tormented. So this is big stakes. So I look at people and they say, oh, we believe in hell. I'm like, so do you drown all your kids before they hit 12? Because I wouldn't take that risk. Like I could drown them, they'll go to heaven, or they don't say the prayer, or they do say the prayer and walk away, they're going to burn for eternity. We better drown these suckers before they're 12. That's the only logic.
What about African tribesmen?
Drown them all.
What about people who have never heard the story?
So, yeah, exactly.
Exactly right.
They don't believe it. And, if you really believed that people you're working with and getting to know and loving and bumping shoulders and walking down the street are going to end up in hell, how are you not tormented out of your nut trying to do everything you can to bring them in? And I see a lot of complacency. And so what I see is through their actions, they tell me, they shout to me, we do not believe in hell. But through their words, they say we do. And the best I can come up with, and it's probably reflecting on my own experience, is I have to believe it if I'm going to, they think that to have any part of Christianity, I've got to take that piece. So I'll give lip service and maybe even a bit of my brain, which I've got to sort of have this dichotomy in my thinking. I've got to do that. Otherwise I'm out, or I'll lose the whole thing. Or I think even in some of my darkest times, you think, I better just try and muster up enough belief that in this thing, or I might end up in that place. And there's a lot of fear that comes on. So in the shorthand, I don't even believe that most people who say they believe in hell actually believe in it. I don't think there's any evidence of that.
Yeah,
but they do believe in heaven.
Yes, I think that's almost a universal belief. I
mean, and what you're talking about there is what Jace was saying about Pascal's wager. Of course, keeping 2 bob each way, and I should cover myself. We do have a question or a comment. Once again, prolific in his comments from my brother, who's from down your way, Jace, down Albany way. I think hell is a concept created by religions as a political tool to control people through fear. And I think that there has been an affiliation through the ages, definitely used as a tool of, be good and you go to heaven, and don't be good and you go into hell. That's pretty much the most, I guess, powerful doctrine that the Catholics sort of spent a lot of time pushing toward people to get them to freak out. And look, it's true. I mean, it absolutely works incredibly. And no matter how much I try and get away from the indoctrination that I went through, there's still, I can say to you, no, I do not believe in hell. And there's a tiny little thing behind me going, yeah, but what if? What if? I don't believe in hell.
But I know what hell is.
Sorry?
I've worked in government. I know what hell is.
Boom. Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah, I think hell is a concept created by religions as a political tool to control people through fear. Guys, want to add anything to that?
Well, I think there's another way of looking at that. And if you go all the way back to early times in the Middle East, we didn't have TV, we didn't have newspapers, we didn't have radio, we didn't have a formal education system like we do today. So what was the best way to teach people right from wrong and hygiene and all the things that we should be doing in a society and a culture that's stranded in the middle of a desert? And I think a lot of the lessons in the Bible, a lot of the parables in there, a lot of the stories in there are actually just really, really valuable lessons that suited the times that these things were written and presented. And today we do things slightly different. We're telling the same stories and we're doing the same thing in terms of education, but we're now doing it through TV and radio and print and schooling and education. So I look at the Bible and I think there's a lot of really good stuff in. There's a lot of horrible stuff in there, but there's a lot of really good stuff in there as well that suited the times. I'm not so sure that all of it is relevant and should be taken literally today.
No, and I think that's something we have discussed a lot and will continue to discuss that. It's interesting you keep talking about morals, which is fabulous, because that was going to be the subject matter for today until Rich reminded me that we promised hell last week for this week. But I think we might do it next week. And the classic example, the example from ignorance is, if you don't believe in God, you cannot possibly have morals. Where do your morals come from? And I think that's going to be a ripper that we'll talk about next week. Now, Rich, one of the things I also wanted to bring up, you did a hell of a lot of study on the emotional damage that can be caused through various methods, I guess, mainly from religion, about believing the hell. And I just want to make a couple of quotes here that you sent through on mental health issues. A huge study ties the doctrine of sin and hell to various mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, and trauma. The concept of eternal punishment for sin can exacerbate feelings of guilt, shame, and fear, contributing to overall psychological distress, and the psychological impacts too on Christian teaching of sin and hell. In the book How God Changes Your Brain breakthrough findings from a leading neuroscientist, guy called Andrew Newberg, and Mark Robert Waldman also assisted on this. The neuroscience of a belief in hell. In fact, any view of God as angry, punishing, etc., actually causes permanent damage to the brain and body. These beliefs are literally making you dumb and sick. Wow. On the flip side, practices that focus on positive and hopeful views of God and the future have the opposite effect. It seems that even if it works for atheists and agnostics, where they emptied the practice of faith, content, but kept the focus on positive and a hope-filled future. But some of the stuff I was reading that you sent through, Rich, on the impact on people's mental health with the fear hanging over them of how it's extraordinary. It's lots of studies done, which I weren't aware of. Where did you get all this stuff from? I mean, how readily available is it?
Yeah, so there's a great deal of research. So there's an interesting book, you mentioned it, a couple of neuroscientists, neither of them claiming a deep Christian faith, one of them actually atheist, studying the science of what happens in the brain when you're contemplating these sorts of things. Really interesting. We know that dwelling on negative emotions and negativity does cause a change in your neuroscience of the brain. And if you do it long enough, you actually can cause permanent damage to your brain and body, literally making you dumb and sick.
Which entails all kind of negativity, doesn't it? Not just
exactly.
about
but it's interesting what they did. They actually looked at then the faith content, because there's studies that show that having a belief is actually good for you all up. But what they wanted to, they obviously looked at belief and said, well, belief is not this one thing. There's heaven, and there's positivity, and there's hope-filled future. But there's also this side to faith, which is actually quite negative. For some, there's a very angry, retributive God. We used to sing a song when we were little, "Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see," because the Father up above is looking down in love. So you better watch out what you're watching. It's like, I never quite got that. It felt like a very twisted way of terrifying your kids, especially marrying this idea of an angry, retributive, all-seeing God, that when you even look at the wrong things, he's going to hurt you. But don't worry, that's the definition of love. That's wrong. And that's just weird. But that sort of dwelling on the negative things, an angry God, even the devil's out to get you. The Pentecostals are good at that. An eternal hell. These kinds of beliefs in specific were shown to correlate to very damaging neuroscientific experiences in the brain. But then they also did, there's been sociologists researching, especially evangelical beliefs, and controlling for a whole bunch of variables. So, they're reducing the likelihood that these are other things. But they found that depression, anxiety, and those kinds of mental health issues are very closely correlated to a belief in hell. Now, what they didn't show in the study was, does the belief in hell, sin, and punishment from an angry God come first and then depression, or are depressed people more likely to have it? Well, anecdotal experience of anybody who's been through it knows that the beliefs come first. The depression may exacerbate it, but and I think there is a bit of a cycle there. But we'd know that those kinds of negative, fear-filled beliefs do cause that, especially. And this is shocking to me when I was reading some of the studies. It's most prevalent around minorities, marginalized groups, people of low socioeconomic status, and people with non-binary and LGBTQI plus sexuality, the very people who Jesus says go out and serve, those doctrines are harming the most. If anything else, that should cause us to really, first of all, consider very deeply if this is something that is useful, and if you can't find your way out of such a belief, surely it's got to temper the way that the church uses it as a weapon, as a tool of fear and manipulation, and a way of bolstering up the ranks, so to speak. We've got to be very, very concerned about who we are harming in that, even if, God forbid, you end up concluding that such an incompatible belief is still logical.
Yeah, I was
I
blown
assume it
away
works
by
quite well
the
for
impact on
children, though, huh?
LGBT. Sorry?
I assume it works quite well for children. Telling them
That's
that,
the most horrific part of it, isn't it?
Yeah. What
Yeah, it is.
about? I read that report you were talking about, Rich, for LGBTQ people and the impact on them. Is that a direct correlation between the fear, the damage that religion has done to them, or is it just grouping them as people who are impacted negatively by any kind of negative issues in their lives, or is it directly a link between? Because I saw that they were singled out a number of times when I was reading that report. It's quite bizarre.
So that particular study was quite targeted at people of an evangelical faith. So we would call it, the really free church evangelicals, Baptists, Pentecostals, Charismatics, those sorts of Christians, and they tend to have a very, very fundamentalist view of these kinds of doctrines. The study basically said the belief in that and being of an LGBTQI status goes hand in hand with these terrible mental health outcomes and suffering and torment and a whole bunch of secondary issues. Examining it from the inside, like I would see myself as inside that kind of church. It's no surprise, because what we have been doing is marrying up a couple of ideas: sin, and especially the quote unquote sin of homosexuality. We won't even get into what the Bible actually teaches about it, but let's just give it them. Sin of homosexuality is a guaranteed go to hell direct card. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Homosexuality directly coupled with eternal conscious torment. And if you are a person of with sexuality not approved by the church, you know that you didn't choose that, because if you could choose it, there was no way in hell you would choose to go to hell.
Correct. Yep.
So it's this idea of I am inescapably damned. There is nothing I can do not to go there. And that is like a double bind. There's no out. And so in that kind of state, of course, these negative outcomes are going to be a natural result. And that calls into question that whole awful teaching from the church.
And you're right, because it's almost like this idea is dangled in front of someone who is LGBTQ, that all you have to do is repent, change your feelings, or cast it out, or do whatever they think you got to do, and then you're all good again. So this isn't you're not doomed. You just got to do this. But of course, you're asking someone to change something so fundamental about who they are, their sexuality, that it's that's not something you can ask someone to do. But we end up with the psychological abuse of things like conversion therapy, right?
Yes.
And you think these poor kids most of the time, but anyone who's like, imagine what that does to the psyche, to the brain, and imagine what that does to someone's concept of God. That I didn't choose this. I was born this way. And yet the same one who created me says I'm not supposed to be this way, and he's going to burn me for eternity unless I change something of myself that I can't really change, but I kind of have to pretend, and the rest of my life's going to be miserable. Like, it's just horrible. I think
I went to
and
a
Luke,
big,
you
Go on.
know, the whole thing that really gets to me about this whole thing is that in the gay community, so they talk about love is love. And like that is almost exactly what we're talking about with Christianity. You know, it's all about love. And we're just saying if two people love each other, that should be okay because they're not hurting anyone else. They're not hurting each other. Everything's good. So what's the problem?
Yeah, I remember going to a huge meeting back in the day when I was working for a radio station, which will include the word ministry into it. And we were invited to, I think it was Riverview in Vic Park, for this great big seminar on how to change homosexuality, how to change gay people, how to, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he and look, and I'm embarrassingly say that when I saw it, it gave me hope, because there was a lot of gay people I was working with back in the day. Not that anyone knew, because it was just, it was unheard of back in the early to mid 80s and stuff. But there was this great big meeting at Riverbank, and this guy gave this lecture on how you could, with therapy, change from being gay to straight, and that way you'd fit into the church so much nicer. And I think about those people now, the damage, and we're talking about the what you were saying, Rich, about all these studies done based upon things like that, which are now. It's like finally doing a study on smoking, 100 years after it started, going, oh my God, look at all it does. It's actually really bad for you. And then suddenly they're realizing and it's shameful. And look, it's a part of the progression about us becoming wiser and smarter and more caring, and realizing that the rules laid down by ignorant people aren't necessarily the best ones to follow. Now, I just want to switch.
I've just had a thought.
Go, mate.
About that. If you think about the Catholic Church for a moment, right? They don't want you to use contraception, and they don't want gay people. You know why? It's just occurred to me. The best way to grow your church is to give birth to more followers. So if we have no contraception, we're going to get pregnant more. And if we're not gay, we're heterosexual, we're going to have more babies.
Right.
Worked it out. I'm on to you, Pope.
Long-term strategy.
I've got a comment coming in from Fenton Mully, which I think we have heard from before. Fenton, on subject. It took me over a year of cognitive behavioral therapy to get rid of hell fear. Wow. As a person on the spectrum, that obsession was seriously damaging, mate. Thank you so much for that, Fenton, because that is exactly what we are talking about now, realizing the dangers of our forefathers and what they thought was wisdom, and it was okay because it was God ordained and it was in the church, so therefore, and that's absolutely classic, mate. I'm so sorry to hear that you went through so much drama of 12 months cognitive behavioral therapy just to get rid of the fear of hell. And I'm assuming from that, with the language that you've used, that you are over that fear. And we certainly hope so. As a person on the spectrum, that obsession was seriously damaging. Just give us a follow-up comment, if you could, Fenton. How are you now? Are you a believer? Were you a believer? Has this changed your view on the whole thing? And you too, listening, of course, if you're watching live tonight on YouTube or on Facebook, and you will know it's live because you'll have a little column on the right-hand side where you can chuck in questions. And we really want you to try and drive the program as much as you can, so that we can have interaction and know exactly what it is that you want to know about. And while I think of that, Rich, I came in halfway through. You're telling Jason before we went on air about a woman who listens every week and was quite upset that when we had the cancellation a couple of weeks ago. What do you know who this lady's name is? I'd love to give her a shout out.
It's I won't be, just in case, if she wants to. She's almost certainly watching now. She can put a comment up and we'll pop it up. But it's a friend of ours we're away with, and it was really nice. It was really good to hear that that this conversation that we're having, which was, and she did mention that the material is great because it's questions that you don't get to ask, especially if you're in a more conservative church
Of
or
course.
that sort of background. You weren't allowed to ask these questions. But also, she loves the way that even though we all have fairly different views, especially about the God question, we're still able to navigate in a very respectful way and get on this thing as well, even if we end up completely disagreeing. We still stick by Jace's one commandment.
Well, I think it's really interesting. When I first switched out of Christianity and became an atheist, to me that was it. There was the black and the white, or the white and the black, however way you want to polarize it. That atheist and Christian diametrically opposed in every way, shape, or form. And since and that was probably a bit over the top in thinking that, but since we've been doing this, I've just realized how many parallels they are. Now, it's true with you guys who are more liberal, certainly, than any Christian people I ever used to know when I went to church. This is heresy with what I was taught. So you guys are very liberal, and we, if you bring it together in a way, Jace, quoting you again, don't be a dick. There's a lot to learn from each other. You don't have to then say, "Oh, I'm switching sides" or whatever. And if that happens, great. But if it doesn't, that's okay, because it's not
But
the
would
end of the
we
world.
actually even get, if you were a more staunch or a less liberal Christian, would we even get them to come on the podcast
No.
and actually have this conversation in the first place?
No, well, you probably wouldn't want it, because that would be an angry argument, which is easy to get into when when you're opposed to such great ideas. And we've had, I've lost my cool a couple of times with these guys, and they've sent me around a few blank checks, and it's been sorted out. But it is respectful, like Rich said. I'm just going to jump across to Fenton again, because he has responded to my request. Thank you so much, mate. Fenton says, it was an incredible relief. I basically had to learn and adapt responsible I hate this word, epistemology to every part of my life, since I feared any decision could lead to help before. I'm an atheist now, from Kath. What does Kath mean?
Catholic.
I'm an atheist now, from Kath.
From Catholic.
Sorry?
From Catholic, I would say.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, we'll fill in the gaps.
And that it wasn't help; it was hell. So
What, sorry?
hell,
not hell.
Any decision could sort of tip you into hell before. So you couldn't even make decisions on your own. And this is another side effect that we didn't see in the studies, which is and it harks back to what Greg was saying earlier, your brother, with being a tool of control. Not fear driving out the ability to think for yourself means you're going to be more compliant, follow the leader's direction, not cause trouble, still bring in your money. I'm being very sort of pointed there, I guess. It's not all as bad as that, but it is. It destroys your ability to think deeply through, come up to a conclusion, and be happy to follow that the best you know how, knowing that you'll be safe because you've been able to think it through. We were taught, no, the heart of man is desperately wicked. So even your best, most logical, most full of love thinking, it still leads you to hell. It's a very soul-destroying way to treat human beings.
Well, if there's no control involved, then the whole threat of hell is pointless. It can only be for control, and control only. I cannot think of another reason for threatening people with something that is terrifying other than then to have control over them. And that's what it has done. Now, when you think about going through life and growing up as a little kid and going through a whole life, and this thing hanging over you, this lie that there is a place that if you don't do the right thing constantly, can you imagine this stress and anxiety in a little kid thinking that they had a fight with someone at school? Bang, logically, for what they've been taught in a lot of evangelical churches, is you're going to hell. That's the deal. We didn't make it up. Well, you did make it up, because it's actually very hard to prove that anyone actually said that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Jace.
Question.
Yeah.
In the Catholic Church, and I profess my ignorance here, I understand that if you have committed some sins on the Sunday, you can go into confession and
Yes.
have those sins absolved.
Mhm.
So does that actually mean that through the week you can do whatever you want to do and then go on a Sunday and actually have that all cleared up so that you can just, reset and start again? Is that
Oh,
how
look,
it works?
that's pretty much the
And
deal in
where is
any
that in the
church.
Bible, by the way?
That's not just Catholicism, of course, because you don't need to go and see a preacher in the confession booth. But that's pretty much what I was of the understanding. I didn't deliberately sin. You don't have to be deliberate to sin, because you sin every day just by the virtue of you being a human being. No one's perfect, therefore you sin. And rather than going in on a Sunday and going into a confessional at a Catholic church, I did it by the hour or the day. Don't mean that I sinned a lot, but you sin as you do it, and that way you keep ahead of it. But yeah, that's a part of the Catholic Church is the ultimate stupid way of doing it, which is totally unnecessary, completely irrelevant, not based upon anything that I could ever imagine was ever in any biblical writings or whatever. But yeah, so yes, you're right. Look, we've got more stuff from Fenton. Ha, I reached the letter limit at Cath. Oh, there's a letter limit.
I guess
Right.
so.
Well done to Luke, because he worked out Catholic. Well done. That was me as a kid, Pete. Ha.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Look,
The suffering kid. Yeah.
yeah, you weren't alone, mate. The world is full of terrified children who, if you studied it even more, and maybe people have already done this, Rich, there would be quite a few couches where people are laying down telling their story that may end up getting to the point where they realize it was all of the bullshit that they were taught as kids, as far as the fear of hell. I cannot think of anything more terrifying, not only in hell in principle, but the fact that they're telling you it's a place where you'll be forever and ever and ever. That is
So those
impossible
people telling
to
that
grasp.
story, they're not obeying the one commandment.
True,
No.
and that's abuse. That
It
is
is.
actually, and I reckon you could actually prove it in a court of law one day. Someone will come out and work out that is actually abuse of children, telling him that. That's as bad as you can get, I reckon.
And that's the thing. This I think the impact of religious trauma is, we're starting to see it a great deal now. There's more and more focus on it, and thank God there has to be. But you see it in the church a lot, and we don't even realize this. I mean, obviously, to do it to children is horrific. But I don't think any parent does that thinking this isn't true, and I'm gonna use this on my kid. They're trapped themselves. They're actually they're trapped in this horrific belief that that they think is true, and so they're actually probably trying. They think it might be an act of love in a distorted way. So we've got to make sure we don't demonize these parents or even these preachers or even the people that believe this, because they're good people that just have a horrible, horrible belief, but they're living out of that belief. And I agree with what Rich was saying around, I don't think they actually believe it. Their actions don't show they actually believe it, but they think they have to. And that's what's important. So it's functioning in that way. It's what I was saying last week. I think what we believe, the content, matters far less than how our belief functions, which is a weird thing to kind of get your head around, but I think it's really important. I've seen even within the church, this is where we see people going to altar call after altar call after altar call, because they think that they keep slipping, and now they're not in the good eyes of God, and now they've messed up, and maybe they're a teenager and they've looked at the wrong stuff on the internet, or they've done this, or they've done that, or they've had whatever it is, and so they're like, now I'm cactus. I need to go back and respond to the next altar call and get good with God again. I need to get right with God. And once I'm right with God, I'll be fine for 5 minutes until you're pissed off in the car park because there's a traffic jam getting out, and you think in your head, this guy's a moron. And Jesus literally says in the New Testament, in the Gospels, if you call your brother a moron, you're in danger of going to hell. Like, again, bad translation, and that's not what he's talking about. But if we actually followed it to that extent, which is, it's just crazy, And even thankfully, I wasn't raised in a fundamental Christian, so I wasn't exposed to that. But my wife certainly was, and right up to even being a young adult, she said that she'd be driving, and if the car in front put its brakes on, too fast, you have those moments where you're like, oh, geez, I'm gonna have an accident. The first thing that would pop through her mind was, I could go to hell. Like, have I forgiven everyone? It was like this split second. It's like this fear that's latent, but then in the moment, it's just burst to the surface. Like, this is what I'm most afraid of. And honestly, it made me want to cry when I first heard that. I was like, this is what a way to be living. Imagine that anxiety, and she's no orphan. That's like, it's rife throughout the church. And then we think, well, if we're supposed to judge a tree by its fruit, what's the fruit of this?
Come on.
It's actually horrible. And this is not something that, you know what? I think even if the Bible was super clear and this is what it is, you'd still have to question it because of the logical, ethical, all of the stuff that we've started to talk about.
Well, Luke, to misquote that famous sage, Forrest Gump, evil is as evil does. That is something that has to be accounted for.
Exactly. And that's what I was saying, just to finish.
I just go, well, oh well.
Exactly. And just to finish that off, but even if it was super clear, but when you actually look at it and you go, it's actually not. And there is a significantly greater weight of scriptures that talk about universal salvation, the restoration of all things, that at the end, all will be with God. And they're far less ambiguous. There's far more of them. They're spoken throughout, not just Jesus, but Paul and all the others. And you go, why are we looking at that going, well, they're metaphors. That's a bit up. Yeah, I don't think that's real. Oh, but this thing about this worm that can't be quenched and this fire and in this metaphor and this parable, let's hone in on that. That's literal. That's definite. But all of this other stuff, let's ignore. It's just crazy,
So how do we draw the line there? I mean, we can't cherry pick from the Bible. You either believe in it or you don't. How do you actually rationalize what you choose to do? I mean, for example, people who are Christians who claim they believe in everything in the Bible, but they have tattoos, which is proscribed, or wear two different types of material, or still eat ham, or whatever else. How do you actually decide what you follow and what you don't?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Jace, because I know Luke and Rich will both say, well, you're talking about the Old Testament, and so it's probably wise not to go there. But what I've learned about these two guys is that, and so for people watching, I went to a Pentecostal church, and it's a very specific way of teaching the Bible and teaching religion and teaching everything else. But what it also according to Luke and Rich, which I've learned a lot about, the teachings from them and many other mainstream churches are not correct per se in the way that the Bible is to be interpreted. Now, that it's not about cherry picking as such, but there are, I've always gone by Mark saying, asking for prayer, asking you shall receive, taking that literally. And these guys would say, well, that's not the way it was meant to be taken. Now, I'm not defending what they're saying, because I've got no way of knowing what they're saying is true, or whether they're both got, a couple of screws loose upstairs. I don't know. But you know what I mean? So it's not... This is the problem with the Bible, and this is the problem we've had since we started this, and this is the 13th episode, is that it's so unbelievably confusing. If it was simple and straightforward, and the only way you could find out about love and forgiveness and all of this stuff was in the Bible, then great. But it's not. You can find out this stuff everywhere. You can know all of the good things about being a lovely human being and not being a dick, just by knowing in your heart what's right and what's wrong. So look, I'll let them answer, but I think that their level of understanding of the original teachings of the Bible and are very different from what we know now. Can I just say that?
Disagree on that, don't they? I mean, Rich has probably got a different perspective to Luke and a different perspective to you. some of them say, no, the Bible is taken literally and everything in it is the word of God, and therefore you cannot pick and choose. And then there's others who go, no, it's a book full of parables and stories and there are valuable lessons to be learned. That entire spectrum, which covers Christianity, that's the bit I struggle with, because
Mhm.
who am I supposed to listen to?
Yeah.
Well, that's it. And you're not alone. You're 100% not alone.
I'll give you like the super short 2-minute version.
Impossible, Richard.
Absolutely.
And I'll give you the 2-hour version.
Yeah,
I've been
that's right.
practicing this one. The super quick 2-minute version is this. No, every single person so-called cherry picks it. Even the most fundamentalist biblicist cherry picks. So no one doesn't. So the question, that's not the question. The question is, how do you navigate the weird thing that is the Bible that contradicts? It's got some stuff. Where do we draw lines in a way that is not arbitrary, but sits in a system? Now, the Christian way to read it, and I will argue it quite strongly, to be a Christian is to read the Bible in a Christian way. And funnily enough, Jesus in the Christian scriptures taught us how to do this. There's a story, he's walking on the road to Emmaus, and the disciples still don't get it. The guy's dead, he's resurrected, he's walking there, they don't recognize him. The disciples still don't get the story of Christianity. And he says, look, let me go through. And it says this, he went through all of the scriptures, all of the writings, and showed how they pointed to the fact that Jesus, the Messiah, had to come, had to suffer and die on the cross. And basically, the way to read it as the Christian is the way to read scriptures as Jesus, because we're following him, and that is to see everything through the lens of God, Jesus, crucified, suffering and dying for the whole world. So that's what Christian reading is. So, you have to argue against the view that says we see something in the best picture of what we imagine Jesus to be, especially as revealed in the scripture. We're talking as a Christian. So there's this image of Jesus. If it doesn't line up to that, that's not reading it in a Christian way. So we see Jesus walking around. Somebody's sinning, he forgives them. Somebody's ripping off people he goes to their house for dinner and sorts them out. They're wanting to kill a woman caught in adultery. There is the death sentence. He lets her off scot-free. He even does this whole sermon. He says, you have heard it said, and he quotes the Old Testament and says, but I'm changing it. This is what you now must do. So to read and to navigate the Bible as a Christian is to change things, is to view things, but not willy-nilly, but through the lens of what Jesus did and taught. And
I find that fascinating what you've just said, because so many conservatives are religious. So many religious people are conservative. And yet what you've just described is a Christ that is extremely liberal, that is small L liberal.
Yes, exactly.
How do they reconcile? I mean, I think it was Gandhi that said, I very much like your Christ, but I really don't much like your Christians. And I see a lot of that, a lack of compassion and a lack of empathy and a lack of charity in people that profess to be Christians. And that frustrates me, because they're all the qualities that I aspire to. And yet, because I don't believe in the supernatural, I'm less Christian than them. If you get my drift, I don't mean because I'm a believer in Christ, but just in terms of the values.
I just said, it's a mystery to me as well. And then I think we have to sort of really look at some of the things that some of our viewers have talked about, which is, we're talking about structures and organization, and then you're talking about control, and then you're talking about all of that kind of stuff. Power. If you hang around Luke, often the theme is power, and I think it's quite an important theme, and that corrupts it. And then you've got politics coming in, and Jesus then. I'm not going to say for all conservatives, but it's a growing, terrible movement where Jesus is no longer God in the flesh who forgave the world by dying on the cross. He is now the mascot for whatever political party you belong to and whatever political and ideological cause. And that is not Christianity. That is a different religion. And people are and especially if some people I know watch this podcast, I'm going to be more on the out than I ever have been before. But I will say to you that you have reduced Jesus to a mascot, and you have a God in your own image, and that's, I mean, how do you
It's
see that?
idolatry. It is
I don't-
idolatry. It's
That
pure
sort of
idolatry.
Southern American Joel Osteen style wealth Christianity.
What an
That
awful
seems
thing.
to me to be something of an abomination. I mean, really, it goes against almost everything that I understand Christianity to be about.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yep, I think guys like Osteen and Ken Copeland, people like that, have just absolutely just thrown their Bible or whatever, whether they were believers in the first place, I don't know. I just think this is a great opportunity for them to make lots of money, and why not exploit something that people are in love with? The whole concept and ideology. What's the word I'm trying to say? Ideology.
Ideology.
Yeah,
Too late, man. Ideology.
yeah, my tongue gets tired at this time of night. Yeah, they are quintessential charlatans of old, done in a new frock and look wonderful and making money out of poor people who think that they're actually legitimate and real, and they're doing it all for God.
How different is that to the Catholic Church? I mean, where is the Pope in the Bible? Where are rosary beads? Where are all the
Praying to Mary
the
and
weird
Joseph.
stuff that goes? Yeah, where is all that stuff? It's not in the Bible. So the church has created this kind of thing, and it's just a big charade. That's what upsets me. Christianity is about a very specific thing. For you guys, it's about Christ and following Christ.
Yep.
For me, Christianity is about the values that Christ espoused and the ones that I thoroughly, completely believe in. But for the Catholic Church, it seems to be more about what Luke says in terms of power. The Pope sitting at the top of all of this and his fantastic hat. That's wonderful, but it's not Christianity from my perspective. And that's probably going to get me in a lot of trouble as well.
Yeah, well done. You've just pissed off about 800,000 people around the world, but that's fine. I'm sure we don't have that many listeners here, but you're spot on with that. I mean, that is an understanding what most people on the outside looking in going, and you can see it. It's clear in black and white for you, Jason, and it is for me and lots of other people as well. Fenton has replied again with the people I've found have the best interpretation study the surrounding cultures, literature, Sumerian, Greek, etc., and archaeologists. They understand why the mythology developed and see the steps. This is right up Luke and Richard's alley. So well done. Thanks for that. What is the time? It's just after 9:15. We're broadcasting, of course, live from Perth, Australian Western Standard Time. So wherever you are in the world, add another roughly, 20 minutes onto what it is in wherever you are, and that's when we'll probably wrap it up. But certainly plenty of time if you've got a question or a comment like Fenton and Greg have done. Please do so on YouTube or Facebook, which is where you are watching us right now. I don't know where we should go now. I think we've covered it pretty well. But yeah,
I've got an idea.
Hands up, yeah, mate.
I think it'd be good to talk not about the history of how this thing developed, right? Which we can do, but might be getting lost in the weeds a little bit. Suffice it to say, it's a lot of the things we've been talking about. But what is it about this idea of hell that resonates with us, even if it's such a horrific thing? And I've got an idea. I think it's something to do with our sense of justice that we feel, and we kind of touched on this a little bit in our debrief last week. We were sort of talking about this idea, this sense of, why has this belief, yes, it's a tool for control, absolutely, but why does it sit with us instead of being outrightly rejected, right? Which it could do, because there's a lot of other stuff in the Bible that we go, yeah, that's not applicable, that we would outrightly reject, and rightly so. But this, for some reason, has staying power. And what does that say about our concept of justice? And therefore, I think for those like Rich and myself, and the first 300 years of the Christian church, who are predominantly universalists before this doctrine kind of crept in and got out of control, how does how does God deliver justice without this sense of a hell? You know, if it doesn't exist, I think that'd be a good thing to explore, because I think that'd be the first thing you say to people. Well, if you take hell away, what happens to, and Hitler is just the go-to bad guy, right? Because he's like a real guy that existed and was horrifically evil. You go, well, what happens to him? Yeah, does he just waltz into his mansion in heaven and you know, through the pearly gates? Is that the idea, or you know, what justice is there for that? So I think that'd be good.
What kind of, you using the word justice instead of punishment? Is that what you're?
Well, I think we've confused the two. I mean, I think really we in our society today, we see them as one and the same. That's why we have the jail system, right? We see people, they go to jail, and we see that as justice. They've been put away. It hasn't brought back the person they've murdered. It hasn't restored them in any capacity. It hasn't really healed anything. You might feel a little bit better knowing they're behind bars, but there's been no real sense of healing. So in a way, justice has been served, but is that the type of justice that we would expect from God?
I think
if it is, hell fits.
Yeah. I think the comfort people get is go to hell. I hope you burn in hell. I hope you rot in hell. It's somehow that. But look, the reason why it continues, Luke, to answer your first part of your question, is because we're taught it by people in authority.
Of course,
no matter how much you think about the people up on on stage in churches, they are chosen, as it were, to be the people of authority, to teach and to often encourage people about what they want to believe in and what they do with it. And that's certainly so. Someone up on stage, like a teacher, telling us something, we accept it as being real. So bang, there you go. You've got people locked into this idea, as like Fenton was saying, how long it took for him to get out of it. So that's what drives it, is we're taught by authority, but there's also this inner thing in justice. We talked about this, I think, at the end of last week about who was that horrific English pedophile who was friends with Rolf Harris. We know he went. He escaped.
I believe I've forgotten
jail. He escaped any kind of punishment.
Yeah.
But people want to believe. Jimmy Savile. People want to believe that he's gone to hell, because if there's no hell, he got away with it, lock, stock, and barrel. But people want to know that there's a hell, but only for the purpose of making sure people like him go there. No, we don't go there. We're not like him. That's for people like the Jimmy Saviles of this world, the Rolf Harrises of this world, not us. We're okay.
But you're making an assumption that there's such a thing as natural justice, which I don't subscribe to. It's things are how they are. There's no natural way of saying that somebody should get justice for something that they've done. But have a look. It's almost a universal belief. It's a fairly simplistic way of looking at things, but people tend to work in a binary mindset. So it's black or it's white, it's up or it's down, it's yin or it's yang. And so when we start talking about things like heaven, well, automatically there's got to be a hell. There's got to be an opposite of that to balance things out. But that's just our simplistic way of thinking about it. There's no nuance there. It isn't necessarily that way. And so, if a murderer does something and they get away with it, nothing has ever said, and keep in mind I'm saying this from an atheist point of view, there is nothing to say that there's any sense of natural justice. It's horrible, but to me, that's just the way it is. And that's why I have a baseball bat.
Are you saying that if you eradicate the idea in your mind that there's no hell, then there's a risk that you may also find yourself eradicating the idea of there being a heaven? Are you saying they must coexist in order for there to be a balance in a person's mind?
I think for the vast majority of people, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think, probably the viewers of this podcast and you other three people here tonight think about things in a lot more depth than what the average Joe thinks about things. And, they're watching reality TV and they're listening to commercial radio. Sorry, Dave.
Sure, people, been cut off. How did that happen?
I don't think are deep diving into this stuff, and they're accepting the stories that they're being told. And you know what? Overall, whilst I do think trauma can be caused from much of this, the lesson is probably quite valuable because it does help reduce the amount of crime that goes on around the place. If people do have that fear of God, if that fear of hell, then perhaps they'll behave a little bit better. We can only hope. I can't profess to know, because I have a much more nihilistic view of things, and I've always had the perspective that when I die, and I actually I take quite a lot of comfort from that.
Which, of course, puts a lot of pressure onto someone like Luke, of course, whose role when he's not babysitting and running a house full of 4 billion kids is that there's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders as a pastor to do two things, as I see it. One is to encourage people about the reality of what it is that they're actually learning in their everyday life. Forget about what's in the book. Put the book aside. You don't need that. These are morals about not being a dick and being good, but also about the dangers of believing in hell. Now, you would be a standout in that field, I would imagine, because by and large, most preachers, pastors, priests, whatever, would talk about there being not necessarily a literal hell, but a place perhaps where God isn't, which is what the original, when hell was originally created, that was a part of the reason behind it. It's a place where God is not. It's the only place where God is not. Is that where you want to go?
Philosophical impossibility as well.
Yes, that's right. It is, but it's a very powerful tool that must put a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. We're watching you, mate.
It could be why I'm unemployed, Pete.
I
don't see my job prospects improving after this podcast, let me tell you.
Well, the Pope has just sent through a message. He loves what you're saying, and has organised an interview with him.
No, look, it's a really, really good point, and I'm glad you raised it, because, okay, so imagine there are people listening to this who are or watching this that are leaders in the church that are still in that space, and you go, well, how does a faith operate if you take away hell, and what happens? But I think it's almost misleading, this idea about the reduced crime and all of that sort of stuff with the belief in hell. For me, the effect of a faith that's really escaping hell, the fire insurance type model of faith, it's very insular, and it borders on escapism. You're just trying to make it through, maybe hopefully evangelize some people at a bus stop and get them to say a prayer as well, so that you've kind of done your job, and then one day die, and then life will begin, right? Because it's like, but you can't take too much of a risk. You don't want to dig into too much stuff. You don't want to ask too many questions, because the stakes are too high because of this belief. And that, for me, is just so jarring against what I see Jesus talking about in bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, in actually standing in the face of oppression and empire, such as the Roman Empire, and daring to say, what if we didn't care about the same things that empire cares about, and instead we flip that on its head, and we embodied an entirely different way of life that cares for those who empire doesn't care for, that treats others in it's been around a long time now. We're very used to these ideas, but this is very radical, very, very subversive. And it was the opposite of what you would preach as a successful path to build a ministry. When you build hell into it, that what Walter Brueggemann calls that prophetic imagination, to believe and embody a different way forward, a different world, and that radical hope of, even with how bad things look, I imagine a world that could be different, and I'm going to do my part in that. That goes away. There's no space for that, because all you're trying to do is keep out of fire and brimstone. And so I see for me as a pastor, and in that space, and as a teacher, and what I would hope other people in those positions would take, is that there's a far more vibrant, a far more effective, and a far more beautiful faith that exists on the other side of this doctrine of a hell of eternal conscious torment. Does hell exist? Yeah, go to Africa and ask one of the child soldiers if hell exists. They're living it. Ask an addict who has lost his family, can't see his kids because he's been gripped by addiction. He's lived it. Hell exists. We can carry it in us, and when we choose a different path other than loving our neighbor, we can create that for ourselves. But that's a very, very different thing to just trying to stay out of some afterlife place that the minute you start actually pulling the thread really falls apart quite quickly.
Does that not perpetuate the whole concept of hell, though, rather than likening it to a human experience, which is tragic and ugly, and if you say, and I get what the analogy you're drawing, it's perfect. Go to Africa and you'll see hell. That's kind of, to me, it's almost though perpetuating the myth of what they're experiencing is relative to a place which we've been told is eternal torment. I'm not saying you can just suddenly change, just go, what you're experiencing is horrible and nasty and blah blah blah. I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying it's inaccurate or untrue. I'm just wondering whether it continues to perpetuate this what people experiencing in Africa likened to an eternal life of torment doesn't marry up too well.
No, it doesn't, because I think we've distorted the concept of hell. We now have Dante's Inferno and the entire Renaissance period and all this. We've got images, right? So we are forever tainted now with, when we talk about the word hell, it will conjure up certain stuff. But I think even when you look at when Jesus is talking and he uses that word Gehenna, and like I mentioned before, it's a real place. He was grounding those teaching moments, saying, if you do this, you're in danger of going to the fires of Gehenna, which was effectively like a rubbish tip. And there was a history of child sacrifice and all sorts of stuff. There were fires burning. There's a real place, the Valley of Hinnom. So the people that are hearing that, they're going, okay, so if I act in this way, there's like this metaphor. They're able to actually imagine, okay, it's almost like my life is going to be on that. It's a picture, it's imagery of saying that's what's going to happen to your life, not one day, but now. You bring that on yourself. That's not a way of living. Choose another way. So we don't really see that anymore. We've got this picture of hell that has kind of been burnt into our minds. Is it compatible? Absolutely not. There's no comparison, which throws the whole justice thing out the whole idea anyway. Because there's no justice of eternity. Our minds can't comprehend what eternity actually means. And even, there will reach a point where it's beyond any form of actually legitimate justice, even for the worst of the worst of the worst. But if we do have that imagery, at least we can use that knowing that it's not a real place. But
heaven is eternal as well, right? So if you go to heaven, that's for eternity. I've never found anything that I want to do for more than 5 or 6 years at a time. So I'm just worried that eternity is going to be a long time and I'm going to get really, really bored.
Wait till you're lying on a cloud with a harp, just singing God's praises. Every time I hear that, I go, "Oh, awesome!"
I don't think you have to worry, Jace. I don't think you're going there, man. It's all good.
Let the record show that the only person who's actually condemned somebody to hell on the show is the atheist. Just putting it out there.
I want to get to Richard in a sec, but just listening to you, Luke, painting the picture of the history and of the beginnings of belief, and I find it really impossible, which I often do at the end of these podcasts, when you sort of package it all together, talking about the reconciliation of the craziness that has happened. Here we are in 2024, still talking about this crazy world, most of which, of course, we're talking about started from the beginnings of gods and beliefs and supernatural and all of this stuff. And it just becomes overwhelming, going, wow, there shouldn't even be the need to have a podcast to discuss such matters. But the very moment on a free thinking mind of a human being, you introduce the concept of gods and belief and heavens and hells and witches and spirits and all of this, the very second you introduce that, it's all over, bar a whole bunch of people arguing and fighting and trying to get together stories and trying to work out what the hell is going on. It's very, very confusing. And I think religion, as a small r, has a lot to answer for. Here we go.
He's
You made it.
Yes.
You will get there in the end.
That is the worst green screen I think I've ever seen in my life. It's,
Thing of beauty, James.
At least heaven has Wi-Fi. That's a good thing.
that's right. I was on a roll then, mate, and you brought humor into it. That's just rude.
I'm sorry.
No.
I'm going to help.
But Rich, I might come back to Luke if we've got time, because what is it now? It's about 9:30, which is normally when we wrap it up. But just one of the things that Rich did, of course, did a lot of study into what we're talking about, the impact on human beings, but just the concept of hell, plus what the idea of the fear of it does to our anxiety and depression and stuff like that. So top it off, Rich, wrap it all up beautifully, and give us what you think about all of your studies that you did in what hell has impacted on people nowadays.
Yeah, so I'll speak in a combination of who I am, which is a young fella growing up in the church, hellfire and brimstone, and like Fenton talked about, I was also that kid, but in an evangelical background. Pete, you would know, if being part of the charismatic Pentecostal church, we add in not just the fear of hell, but now we've got a whole bunch of demons running around tormenting us at the same time. So we've got like the double whammy. And, so from a very personal experience, but then reading the studies and then seeing a lot of that add up. Now, I'm very conscious. Look at me. I am I'm going to claim middle-aged. I reckon 48 is the new start of the middle age. I'm middle-aged. I'm white. I'm wealthy. I'm living in Australia. This is paradise, this side of the country in where we are. I am one of the most privileged people out there. I'm very conscious how justice and minority groups, that kind of thing, we've got to grip with. Justice has to be something real. I can see the thing of that. And maybe I'm just so comfortable turfing hell because I don't need any sense of natural justice because I'm at the top. That aside, all of that aside, so I don't think we need it. First of all, from a Christian point of view, we've talked about it. The early years of the church didn't teach it. It came in, and we can see some control measures and all of that stuff coming out. So you don't need the doctrine of a hell of eternal conscious torment to be an orthodox, central, even conservative Christian. You don't need it. Okay, that aside, the torments of hell are very real. The torments of hell look like people who cannot change their sexuality, even after they've rejected their faith, left the church, left everything. They close their eyes and they're tormented by this thing. This is not right. This doesn't look like being a good human or anything as a Christian we would want to claim for our religion. There's something definitely broken there, and it is directly tied to what we've been tormenting people with. Children tormented with night terrors. We know that a belief in hell exacerbates, just like Fenton said, people with on the spectrum or obsessive compulsive disorder. We know that if you have a person with obsessive compulsive disorder, you start teaching them about hell, you are 100% going to make their condition worse. You're not going to help them whatsoever. Even if they say the prayer, do all the stuff, believe it wholeheartedly, they're going to start obsessing on that, and you're going to make their condition worse. Such a thing cannot be good or right or true. And so we've got to really account for what we see with our eyes. If we take all the speculation away, let's look at our brothers and our sisters, the people we live with. I'm not talking about literally your brothers and sisters. I'm talking about who is my brother, who's my neighbor. It's all of us. What are we doing to each other when we're doing this sort of thing? And we've got to really take into account evil is as evil does. A teaching of hell. I've seen it do nothing but torment, hurt, cause mental illness, exacerbate mental illness, really ramp up guilt and personal torment. And also, as Luke was saying, in the life of the church, the more I see a person really focused on a hell as a eternal place, they really do shut down their life into one direction, which is either just keep me and my own safe. Their world becomes very small, or they become really, really weird in their evangelistic efforts, to the point where you're like, no, that's not even Christianity anymore. You're weird. So I've never seen anything good out of that. And Christians, I will challenge you there, because some of you are listening to me are like, okay, it's Richard. He's not a complete moron. I know his Christian life and witness. He's not even a liberal Christian. He's a orthodox conservative Christian in many ways. I will ask you this question. Examine yourself. You say you believe in hell. Look at what you do. I will say you don't believe in hell because you don't act like it's true. And because you don't act like it's true, there's two conclusions. You don't really believe it. So you might as well cut the cord with that terrible doctrine and just become free and live either a life of a decent human being like Peter and Jace, just, with their one commandment, or you can still be a Christian and live a life of flourishing. There's all these choices. The other alternative is you are a psychotic nightmare that you can live with this idea that most of the people you see on a day-to-day basis will end up being tormented forever. And you're okay with that. Those are the only two alternatives. And I think most of the people I know who are Christians don't actually believe in hell. So it's time we just left that nonsense behind as decent human beings and get on with the business of the one commandment. Christians add another commandment. We do have the don't be a whatever. I haven't got stuff to do it on air yet. Maybe one day. Don't be a yes, but we add one. Love the Lord your God as well. But we can all agree on that one commandment. That's in the Bible. So that's my wrap up.
The things you hear when you haven't got a stage, eh? That was, mate. I wish I had heard that when I was in church. I give you the big
So
tip.
did I, mate.
It would have blown me away. I would have probably disagreed with it and not understood a word you were saying. But in 2024, I can get look. I just had a question. If we're happy to go a couple of minutes over,
Sure.
I forgot to ask. Does anyone have anything whatsoever, anything that they can say good about hell? Is there anything good about the concept, not the reality of it, but is there anything you thought someone said or did something which without the concept of hell they may never have done, other than the fear aspect? Forget that.
You don't have to wear a jacket. I know that much.
Yeah, that's a good thing that would happen. That's assuming, of course, I'm sort of talking more metaphorically rather than literally. There is nothing. Hang on a minute. I've got a couple.
Oh,
songs. How many great songs? Great because they're singing about Highway to Hell from Akadaka. Which one?
Bells.
Hell's Bells.
What's the great song by Chris Rea, On a Road to Hell? Lots of good songs. There we go. Something positive has come out of it.
Again, the arts exploring this concept is quite interesting. I haven't studied the lyrics and music of Highway to Hell ever, but I would suspect there is a element of protest in that song and those kinds of songs, of the human condition, either rejecting such awful doctrines, if it's going to be so explicit, or just the concept of that kind of thing. So we're either going to protest it or completely embrace it in this sort of nihilistic move as well. So I think
Bon Scott, one of the great theologians.
Do you know what's interesting, though, that I just realised, and we're all guilty of this, I guess, to a degree, if guilt's the right, let's talk.
It is for tonight.
Talking about guilt, is we haven't, none of us have addressed the whole reason, of course, why the idea of hell is there, well, perhaps more as a later development, and that, of course, is Satan and the devil. We haven't talked about if there's a hell, we're assuming that it's controlled by Satan, the connection between the serpent in the Garden of Eden and you know, is there a natural connection we haven't made tonight, gentlemen?
There's nothing biblical in that picture, but a lot of that comes from Renaissance art. You know, Dante's Inferno, that sort of stuff.
Yep.
But there's not a single, you know, line in the Bible that could even be misconstrued as this idea that Satan's running shop down there. We can connect the dots, but I think Satan's right.
Could you not construct a stretch with the snake in the garden? I mean, who was he representing?
Oh yeah, you could, but that was a later development, later interpretation as well. Oh yeah, of course you can draw the connection, but we bring a preconceived idea in to draw that connection. I think Satan's a really good topic for another night, though.
That's a good one,
fascinating one.
Although I saw it on television once. The Satan did look a lot like Rowan Atkinson welcoming to hell. I don't know if you've seen that skit, but if you have not watched that, if you're watching this, please go and search up Rowan Atkinson's "Welcome People to Hell" skit, because it serves us all up a good serving, and it's probably a very good after dinner mint to follow up this podcast.
I think I may have seen that, and I remember watching it with great joy. A final comment from Kirk Pridham. Thank you for this discussion tonight, guys. Really thought-provoking, much appreciated. Kirk, that means a lot to us. We put a lot of effort into creating this and making it for people like yourself, and it's nice to be appreciated. So thank you so much. I have concluded something quite profound, guys, the end of this discussion tonight. I think if you want a definition of what hell is, the church rejecting the most vulnerable, like LGBTQ people in our society, is about as close to what hell means to me as you can get.
Amen, Peter.
You either welcome everyone with open arms, regardless of who they are, or you pack up and go and do something else, because it's an absolute epic failure on every point. The church can in any way reject anyone, especially those kind of people who now have to battle with not only the bullshit that they were taught about hell, but the incredible and detrimental impact on their lives. It's, lot to answer for.
I think Jesus would agree.
Oh, look, mate, absolutely. Without getting into the whole, as Jay said, the super spiritual side of things, the character of Jesus, the person that we do know as a historical character. I mean, and Jace also alluded to something, how far away you could possibly get from the basic teachings. Jace, I talked to these guys, I think it might have been last week or the week before, about when I became a Christian and I tried to convert my dad. And every day I'd say, Dad, you got to read this scripture. You got to read Ephesians, or Romans or whatever. And Dad just kept saying it's love. It's just about love, son. It's just about love. No. Scripture, Dad. It's listen. And he was right. That is the whole message of Jesus is summed up in 4 letters, LOVE. That was it. And look how much we have bastardized the hell out of it. We couldn't have done more except destroy it.
And can I just say one thing as my takeaway from this evening? Yeah. It shouldn't have to happen to you for it to matter to you.
Come on.
I think that is almost a sense of justice right in that. So when you see other things happening that aren't right, get yourself involved, help sort that out. That is what makes you a good person. And that is what I, in my ignorant, naive concept of Christ, that's exactly what he would have done.
So good.
Charity,
it.
I don't think
empathy,
you're not.
compassion.
I don't think you're naive about the concept at all, Jason. I think you absolutely summed it up 100% accurately. I mean, I think it's self-evident. It's not rocket science. It is a basic formula. Again, don't be a dick. It's a great formula. I reckon if Jesus was sitting there right now, he'd say, "Don't be a dick." Not like that because he's not Australian, but you know what I mean. It would come out differently, but
And
I'm
in
sure
Aramaic.
yes. Exactly. And another comment from Fenton as we close up at 20 to 10. Good stuff, guys. Fabulous. Pleasure, Fenton. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Fenton.
jumping online. Kirk as well. Greg, hopefully do it again next Wednesday. We might talk about morals and can you be a good person without, well, we've discovered tonight that we can, but that could be an interesting discussion. No promises. We don't know what we're going to discuss next week, but certainly we will be back 8 o'clock Australian Western Standard Time next Wednesday, which will be the 27th.
7th.
It's 20th today. Cool bananas.
Thank
Guys,
you for having me,
so much.
guys.
Thanks, Jace. Thank you so much for
Thanks,
jumping in,
Jace.
mate. We look forward to, you know, if Suresh is not around, to call on you if we can. We might even make the screen go into 5. I don't know whether that'd be. Hey, where does
We
it
want
end?
Jace.
Hey?
That's a big promise.
Well, the good thing about it is it would reduce all of our faces smaller. So it would have less impact on affecting, you know, talking about kids going through hell. I hope there's none of them watching. Guys, thank you so much for tonight. Look forward to catching it. Jace, when we finish here, stick around because we have a bit of a chat afterwards. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next Wednesday. Cheers, guys.
See you later.